Hello, Southeast sports fans. I'm Hanna Barton, joined by Brenden Schaeffer, and we are here to preview your 2025 Oklahoma Sooners. Another team preview to check off the list here for the SEC. And Brenden, this is kind of a make or break year for the Oklahoma Sooners.
There's no doubt about that, Hannah. Second year in the SEC after the first year did not necessarily go the way that they envisioned it would, certainly the way that Sooners fans envisioned that it would. Don't get me wrong, tough schedule last year, but now you play all the same teams within the conference, just switching the location. So it's not necessarily going to get a whole lot easier this year. But for Oklahoma, their hope is that the new quarterback and the new offensive coordinator he brought with him is going to make the difference this year for an offense that just wasn't quite up to par last season.
Yeah, it's 6-7 last year, only 2 wins in that SEC play for their first year in the SEC. And I think a little bit of what might light the fuel to the fire is that their counterpart that joined the SEC with them, and that's in Texas, of course, kind of had the opposite effect, really made a name for themselves in the SEC, where Oklahoma definitely kind of fell towards that back end. So kind of a bounce back year for them for sure. And like you mentioned, that new OC bringing the quarterback with him from Washington State. So, what do we think this offense is going to look like under kind of a new helm?
Yeah, it's going to be completely different, right? Last year's story was that Jackson Arnold maybe wasn't ready for the show, and he's on to Auburn now, and we'll see what becomes of his career. But they just didn't have the consistency in the quarterback play. In fairness to Oklahoma, a lot of their pass catchers kept getting injured as well. By the end of the season, the attrition to that room was pretty substantial, and they've reloaded in that regard as well. Bringing in John Mateer, though, bringing in Arbuckle, his offensive coordinator from Washington State, comes over to do the same role here with OU. I think that's going to have this as a completely different looking offense. And I'm also excited for them about the running back transfer that comes in from Cal. Jaden Ott is a dude. If he's healthy, he's really going to be a force. I think instantly becomes one of the top running back threats in the Southeastern Conference. So really, it's a completely new looking offense, which is basically what the Sooners need for that room after what happened a year ago with that side of the ball.
Yeah, especially you mentioned Arbuckle coming in really heavy on kind of that air raid style offense, really going to rely on John Mateer, who is named at Walter Camp Player of the Year watch list already. And, this kind of seems like the right narrative for Oklahoma. Of course, back in the Lincoln Riley days, we were really used to seeing Oklahoma being one of those schools that produced star quarterbacks. And so my question is now, with the new OC and Arbuckle, are they going to be able to do that with John Mateer? Will he be kind of this next Oklahoma product that comes out? Specifically, we've seen the success they've had when people transfer to Oklahoma as quarterbacks and then are able to come out and have successful careers, not just in college, but in the NFL as well. But yes, talked about that wide receiver room, really restocked in the transfer portal, but definitely hoping to have those returners stay healthy so that they bring that veteran presence in this new season. However, defense was not something that the Sooners struggled with as much last season.
No, I mean, they had a top 20 defense in terms of opponent yardage per game. They're bringing back some talent, and they've reloaded in that regard as well. Some guys that are across that defensive front maybe didn't play as much last year, younger players that are stepping into their own as well. They should be really good on that side of the ball. And so if you believe in the renaissance that's coming for the Oklahoma offense, which, like, if you look at the numbers from John Mateer at Washington State under this similar system, it's kind of hard not to believe. Over 3,000 yards, 29 touchdowns to 7 interceptions. He had a really good season out there, and bringing that into OU, plopping it into the Southeastern Conference, that's the hope that they're going to be able to basically maintain what they were defensively from a year ago and then find a way to get up to speed on the other side of the ball. If you do that, I know the schedule's tough, and we'll get to that in a bit, but there is some hope here for Oklahoma to be able to maybe meet the standard that they're more accustomed to meeting. The fact that you see the preseason coaches top 25, and Oklahoma does not appear in that coaches poll. It's the first time in a long time that that's happened, Hannah.
Yeah, first time in 25 seasons since 1999 that the Sooners have been outside that recent top 25 coaches poll. So definitely some high expectations, definitely some pressure on this team to kind of get back to what we have been used to seeing with them. The question being, is John Mateer kind of going to be able to handle this next level SEC pressure, and of course the rest of the team as well? We're going to hear more from Kylie and our special guest from SEC Media Days on what that might look like for the Sooners having a successful run.
Thanks, Hannah. Well, we got to talk to Dari Noka at SEC Media Days, who went to Oklahoma and now covers them and every other SEC school as he works for SEC Network, so he's somewhat of an expert. He said that Oklahoma's offense is going to be even better this year. Their defense is going to be just as good as they were last year, and of course, there are a bunch of questions around quarterback John Mateer, who's coming in from Washington State. Let's hear more on what Dari thinks of his alma mater.
What are a couple of teams that you think like have maybe the most at stake this season, whether it be coaching positions or fan base reaction, whatever that may be?
I think that there's two that kind of jump out, and they will play as each other's first conference game in late September, and that's Oklahoma and Auburn. Those two both disappointing last year. Hugh Freeze didn't expect 5-7 from him. Brent Venables has had 2 6-7 seasons in his 3 years there, with a 10-2 in between, or 10-3 in between. Those two, when they meet in Norman in late September, is going to be massive, I think. There's optimism around both of them. Significant optimism, I think, around Oklahoma right now. So I think that those two are probably, when you look at that, teams that have had great histories that are down but maybe close to coming back, I think those are the two that come to mind. They go to South Carolina, they go to Tennessee, they go to Alabama. So it's a tough road schedule for sure. But they also get Ole Miss at home this year. They get Mizzou at home this year. They get LSU at home this year. So, and then the Texas game is huge. They got Michigan at home this year too, which should be one of the great non-conference games.
What is that, their second game?
Second game, yeah. And then Auburn, their first conference game, which is their fourth game. It's a huge year for him. 6.5, I feel like low. I would take the over on that. I think that I think the offense will be drastically better than it was, and the defense will be as good as it was. And if that happens, you're looking at an 8 or 9 win team. And I think at the end of this, then Brent Venables finds himself in a really good place.
Right. If it's 6 wins and you win that rivalry game, do you think fan base will be pretty content with that?
No. 6 wins, but one of them is against Texas.
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. And the other problem is it may not depend what the fans think, because they're looking for a new athletics director. So, because Joe Castiglione, who was at Missouri for 5 years before his 27+ year run at OU, is stepping away, and he's kind of stepping away slowly, but they are searching for somebody new. And anytime you get a new AD, I think any head coach gets a little bit nervous because you don't know what they're looking for. I think John Mateer at Oklahoma is going to be a really good addition to that team. I think that watching him in an offense that he knows, with his offensive coordinator that came with him from Washington State, I think he's certainly somebody that we're going to pay a lot of attention to. And Jaden Ott, their tailback that they got from Cal, who went for 1,300 yards a couple years ago, is certainly another one.
Oklahoma Sooners coming off that 6-7 record from last season. Now we're taking a look at this season's schedule to see if they can put together something better. Brenden, what does the win total look like for the Sooners right now?
Yeah, it's interesting. Over at DraftKings Sportsbook, it's 6.5, which feels like a pretty low number, but obviously not one that they were able to clear last season. Over on that 6.5 win total for the Sooners is -180 odds. So you'd wager $18 to potentially profit $10, which is suggesting that, they're favored to end up clearing this 6.5 win total. Elsewhere, you can find potentially, if you're wanting to be a little bit more aggressive, the idea that Oklahoma could win 8 games would be +115 in some sportsbook spots. And so they're between 7-8 would be a season that probably falls in the range of what's expected from Oklahoma this year. But of course, that schedule is so interesting. You see it there on your screen. You got a couple of games that, of course, you expect them to clean up. Illinois State, they do play at Temple, which is a little bit curious, but that shouldn't be a problem. And Kent State, 3 of the 4 non-cons should obviously be W's for Oklahoma. But you have that Michigan game on September 6th, and then a really loaded conference slate that includes, of course, the Red River rivalry. They have to go to South Carolina, to Tennessee, to Alabama. And they've also got Ole Miss, Missouri, LSU at home on that schedule. So, it's not an easy conference slate by any stretch of the imagination for Oklahoma. I think this year, let's say John Mateer steps forward. He's +2,500 for Heisman odds at DraftKings Sportsbook, which is, one of the names that's more prominently featured on that list. But at the same time, he could have a great season. Oklahoma could have a really legitimate defense, and then they could still manage to only win maybe 7-8 games because of how difficult their schedule is. That's the part that, I'm going to put them in just about every game that's on this schedule, but I can't necessarily say they're going to win them all.
Looking at the schedule, it's really kind of that second half that would kind of wear on me if I was Oklahoma fans looking at this, because obviously you have those games, like you said, the ones you're expected to clean up, the Illinois States, the Temples, the Kent States. Then you get to have Auburn at home, which is going to be a help. Obviously, that's one that when we mentioned in our Auburn preview, we have circled on our schedule because of the Jackson Arnold Oklahoma return. Obviously, Texas away is kind of those where, it's the Red River rivalry. So you really don't know. While a lot of people look at that and say, okay, that's going to favor Texas. It's a rivalry game. You never know what's going to happen. But then you're looking at the second half of the schedule. Your away games are taxing, and you're hosting some pretty high-end teams at home as well. So I think that second half of the schedule is going to kind of be where things can be determined. If they can get off to a strong start, obviously win Illinois State, win Temple, win Kent State, I think they very well could win Auburn. Michigan, to me, is a toss-up. I feel like with Michigan, you just don't know what you're going to get. Say you drop Texas, you have one loss heading into your second half of the schedule, and that's going to kind of be where you see, is it going to be 6 wins? Is it going to be 8?
Yeah, and look, Oklahoma fans are going to say, well, why are we capping it at 6 or 8 when there's the hope that with one of the top quarterback transfers in the country, with a defense that was top 20 a year ago, there's no reason that this team can't finally make its real announcement into the SEC and go ahead and sneak into the playoff this year. I think at 9-3, Oklahoma would be a bona fide candidate for the CFP simply because of the strength of that schedule. So you can't necessarily count them out. When I look at games, I try to cobble together in my mind, okay, if this is kind of a toss-up, every time I look at 2 toss-ups on a schedule, I might have to go ahead and pencil in 1 loss for them just to kind of come up with a mental picture of what that season could reasonably look like. I agree with you, Michigan, more of a toss-up, but I think that's one that, man, if Oklahoma gets it, you are legitimately talking about a potential 5-0 start going into the Red River rivalry. I'll still lean Texas, but there's no reason that Oklahoma in a rivalry setting like that can't end up with the win. And look, if that happens, if they beat Texas and they're 6-0 going into that brutal second half, they'll be doing so with a top 5 ranking in the country next to their name. There's no doubt about that. And I can't necessarily count Oklahoma out for that possibility. But then when you look at, okay, South Carolina on the road, at best, that's a toss-up because they're returning one of the top quarterbacks in the country, and you got to go into their place to play it on October the 18th. So nothing easy about that. Hosting Ole Miss, again, feels like 2 really competitive teams. Going to Tennessee, I kind of lean Oklahoma in that game because of Tennessee's quarterback uncertainty, but still on the road at Neyland is no easy task. Then you go to Alabama. You got the return of that game with Missouri after Oklahoma lost it at the end in Columbia last year. That's going to be a very competitive one. And then LSU. So I just, that back half of the schedule, they might need to be 6-0 going into that second half in order to feel really good about their chances to make the playoff, because to lose 2 or 3 of those final 6 would not necessarily be a surprise to anybody. And again, that's not me knocking the Sooners. They could be really good, and that could still be the case. I think you're talking about talent-wise, one of the top half teams in the SEC, but schedule-wise, one of the most difficult to navigate.
And let's say that schedule does get the best of them. You start with maybe a couple losses heading into that back half. That back half maybe falls apart. You're sitting at 6 wins. What does the future for Venables look like at Oklahoma?
Yeah, Brent Venables, I think, is on one of the hotter seats in the country, but the offseason that OU had would tell you that everything should work out, right? Like, you identify what was the problem last year. It was largely the offense. If that's the case, you come through and say, we have got to, in a major way, put resources toward fixing that. New OC, new quarterback that has continuity and familiarity with that OC to bring in this system, aerate it out, and be able to put up points in the SEC. Okay, all of those things have happened, which would make it even more disappointing, I think, for OU fans if they do end up around that 6-6 mark once again. And with the schedule, I can't discount the possibility. Look, with that 6.5 number on the win total, it's minus 180 on the over, as I mentioned, but that also means that there's a pretty juicy return potentially on under, because under 6.5 would net you plus 140 odds, meaning $10 wager wins $14 if it comes to fruition. And that is the side I would lean strictly because of the betting odds. I feel like it's a toss-up for them to be between 6 and 7. And if you're going to give me plus 140 on under, that is the direction that I'm going to go. I do think they can probably beat Michigan. And in fact, they probably will. I'm projecting a solid 5-0 going into the Texas game, but I don't think they beat Texas. And frankly, I think that's going to be tough to get back up off the mat and go to Columbia, South Carolina the very next week. So that would be 2 losses potentially. Ole Miss is at home and at Tennessee. They could potentially get both those games, but at Alabama, that's probably a third loss. If I give them both Ole Miss and Tennessee, I probably should give one game to LSU or Missouri. I mean, that's 4, and that's assuming that you do beat Michigan. That's assuming that you don't kind of see the wind out of your sails down the stretch. 7-5 is probably my predicted record for Oklahoma, if I'm being 100% honest. But the odds being so heavily favored on under makes me kind of lean in that direction. Ultimately, this is probably a bet that I would stay away from, generally speaking. And I am a big enough fan of John Mateer to say, if you sprinkled those Heisman odds, I wouldn't necessarily say that that was a crazy move. But that being said, could they go 7-5 and still get rid of Brent Venables? I don't think those different odds boards that you see about the first coach to be fired in the Power 4, Brent Venables on some offshore sports books was pretty high up that list. But I don't necessarily see that happening early in the year, because even if they do happen to lose to Michigan, you're still 4-1 going into Red River. I don't believe they're going to lose to Auburn at home. And so with that being considered, it's probably not early in the season that Venables has any issues. Hanna, it's that second half of the schedule, as you mentioned. If OU doesn't pick up their wins there, by the time the calendar turns to November, you could certainly have Sooner Nation up in arms if things don't break their direction this year.
So locking in, what is your overall win prediction for the Oklahoma Sooners?
I'm going to give them 7. I'm going to give them 7-5. And by the way, I pegged it last year. I looked at their schedule coming in, and I know they were excited about the SEC. And I was a little bit of a troll from Oklahoma. I'll admit to that. But when I saw that schedule, I put out there on social media and said that the most important game for them this year is going to be Houston, because if they lose that one, they're not going to be bowl eligible. And sure enough, they went down to the wire with Houston. That was not a team that you wanted to go down to the wire with. They handled it, but they did end up going 6-6. So I would say pessimistic compared to the rest of the populace on OU last year, but I was also spot on. This year, I'm more optimistic. I am a believer that this offense is going to be better, but I think the schedule is tough enough that 7-5 is about where I think they'll end up, which will be disappointing. I think if you talk to OU fans right now, they are definitely believing that a playoff appearance is possible. We'll know by the time that Red River game rolls around, though. Like, they don't have to win it, but if they're competitive in it, that really tells you that OU has turned a corner and might be able to manage that second half of the schedule more capably than I'm giving them credit for, at least today in early August.
I mean, being an SEC team, I think the expectation is you make a playoff. So it's kind of encouraging to see that Oklahoma fans are maybe starting to get the way we do things around here. But all right, you're locking in at 7. Only time will tell as we continue to cover the Sooners and all of the SEC teams heading into the rest of the season. But thank you guys for joining us today, wrapping up your Oklahoma 2025 preview. I'm Hanna Barton, Brenden Schaeffer, and we'll see you guys next time.